This video is on the use of record sets as variable inputs in Model Builder. I'd like to show you what they are and how they're set up, and then lastly run you through an example of how it's used. Are very similar to the use of feature sets, and I would recommend watching my first video on those to get a better idea of how to use variable inputs. So what exactly is a record set? A record set is opposite of a feature set in that it is tabular data. It's essentially inputting attribute information into the fields that you have specified within your variable, whereas a feature set is a point, line, or polygon instead that you can just put on the map. This is working with tabular data, and it's very common to use it in an append situation. In the example we'll be going through, we'll be inputting address information and geocoding it so that it can then run through the rest of the process. Just to give you a visual, this is a screenshot of the tool, the inputs for the tool we'll be using, and you can see that my record set at the top allows me to put in a vendor name and then some address information before I hit OK. So we'll jump into ArcMap and I'll show you a few things about record sets. Like my other example, we have two layers. We've got vendors and participants in the WIC program. And the instance or the case that we'd like to use this model for is understanding how many existing participants and existing vendors there are within a buffer or an area of a potential vendor location. So to do so, we could go the long way and create a feature class, put a point on a map, create the buffer ourselves, and then perform the selection. But rather, we've automated it into a model, and that model looks like this. And it's essentially the same model that I used for the feature set, but it has one more step added onto the beginning of it. Our feature set started with the buffer, and the input was that feature set, that point that we wanted to get fed into the buffer and then into the selection. But in this one, you can see we have a geocode beforehand because our record set is right here. It's our input address that goes into the geocode, and then that output feature class gets then put into the buffer. So to make this record set, we just right click within the model somewhere and go to variable, create variable. We can look up record set and we can double click it and it'll be put on, but it's empty because it doesn't know what fields it should be looking for, what fields we want to input. So like the feature set, we can come into the properties, and under data type we need to specify the schema or the symbology. So in a lot of cases we might want to select an existing layer because we would probably be doing some sort of append or merge function with tabular data, so we want to carry over the same fields than that of what we're going to be appending into. But in this case, because I want my specific address fields, I created a sheet in Excel with just those field names with vendor, address, city, state, and zip. And I could go find it if I wanted from the folder button here, but I have it in my table of contents already. And I can just select that sheet 1 and hit OK. And it'll fill that in now. So now it knows if I were to use that as an input into any one of these processes, that it would only have vendor, city, state, zip, and address. It's essentially the same. It is the same. It's a copy of what we already have that's existing, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. But that's the process right there, our record set. tabular data. We're going to tell it an address. It's going to geocode it, run it through the buffer, and then select out what we'd like from that buffer. So I can minimize this. And I can, from here, just double click my model and it'll come up, and it might take a minute or two. Things always take a little bit longer in Model Builder when you have a geocoder in it because it has to load that geocoder. Okay, so that took a minute or two to open, but now you can see this is the tool from one of the previous slides. This is the input. We have our input address, which is that record set. We have a few more specified inputs, but really what I would like to do here is, oops, I just hit add one record. We can always do as many as we'd like, but just say vendor 1, type in the address, that would be my work location. I'll leave that 5 miles, and this will just get overwritten here, and whoops, that's not specified correctly. And I'll just hit OK once that overwrites it. Okay, so these errors are okay because they're just going to overwrite what I have that's existing, and I can hit OK, and it's going to run through that model, and it'll probably take a minute or two because that geocoder, that takes a little while to get initiated in Model Builder. So I'm just going to pause it and I'll come back when it's done. Okay, so it took a little longer than expected, but as you can see, it put our potential vendor location point on the map with a 5-mile buffer around it. And it selected a row count of how many participants fell within that buffer, and then up here is my row count of how many test vendors fell within that area as well. So I can close that. And if you need to get back and see those results, you can always come back to geoprocessing results as well, and come to the current session, which is that most recent one up top, and you can see there's my 11 and my 150. So that is using record set. That one was for geocoding, but you could also use it if you'd like to append data into an existing data set. If you have any further questions about it, feel free to contact me here. Or if you'd like, this is the link to the ArcGIS online resources page. You can get a little bit more in depth with it and see some other examples of how both feature sets and record sets are used.